Fantasy people, welcome back to another video. We've just finished round 13 and we're heading into round 14. We're getting to that stage of the season where we're not really looking for value picks anymore. We just want to get the best of the best. So this week I've delved into the stats and I've tried to make some projections on who is going to be the best scoring fantasy midfielders for the rest of the season. This video is not going to contain any of those dual position players. It's only going to be the pure midfielders. If you like this kind of content and similar videos about AFL Fantasy, please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and let's get into it. Coming in at number 10, it's Christian Petracca with a projected average of 109 points. So what do we like about Christian Petracca? He has a really high time on ground number, 88%. That is elite amongst midfielders. His CBAs are also really high, as Melbourne like to run that really tight-knit group as their CBA. They really only play Clayton Oliver, Christian Petracca, Jack Viney. Harms goes through there a couple of times, and that's about it, really. So, looking at his stats, he averages 28 disposals for the season, and that's down a little bit on last year with 29 disposals, but not much of a difference. And if we include that game that he was sick and he only had 10 disposals, then that probably accounts for that. Looking at the marks, same as last year, he averages about 5 marks a game, which is pretty nice. The big problem there is the tackles. So he's down from 4 tackles last year to 3. I'm not really sure about that. Often players like him that are quite impactful and they're more forward 50 players, they can have a low tackle count. I expect that he'll maybe get that up a little bit, as he does play predominantly as an inside midfielder. So I think he can really improve on that and get his average up from the 103 that it's at the moment. I don't think he's going to go with that 115 that he did at the back end of last year. If you look at his season splits, he went 107 and then 115. I don't think he's going to go 115, but I think it's going to be around that 109, 110 mark, which is going to put him in the top 10, but I don't see him being one of the top sort of 3 or 4 midfielders going for the rest of the season. Also coming in at number 10, because I could not split these two players, it is Zach Merrett. Now, Zach Merrett finds himself into this list mainly because of his history. He is historically a fantasy gun. He's averaged up to 117, 118 points per game in one of the seasons. He has dropped off a little bit from that in the recent seasons, and I think last year he went at 111. So that's still a very good average, and if he went anywhere near that, it would be a very good season, given what he's priced at as well. But I project him to go at 109, just under that for the rest of the season. He does have a really good run home there. You can see he's got 6 easy matchups and 4 difficult ones. I do see Merrett as quite a sort of outside player, so I do think that it will benefit him to play against easier opposition. Now, why I put Merrett on this list is I do believe he has a lot of room for improvement on what he's currently doing. Now, he has 81% time on ground, which is fine, which is about the same as he has done throughout his career. But the big place I see improvement is the CBAs. So in 2021, he had 80% CBAs, and that is down to 60 in 2022. Now, given that Parrish is under an injury cloud now, as he was subbed off in the last game, I do think they will rely on Merrett a little bit more. I know they're going to run guys like Archie Perkins and younger players through the midfield, but I do think that Zach Merrett is going to be needed in the back half. If he can even push that number up to 70, 75% with the CBAs, it's going to improve one position on his stat line, and that is the tackles. If you look at his 2002 data compared to his 2021 data, he went at 5 tackles in 21 and only 3 this year. That is a direct correlation to the CBA percentage. And if he can get that CBA percentage up, that's going to improve his tackles, which is going to get that average up. Coming in at number 9, it's Jack Mcrae. Historically, he's a fantastic fantasy scorer. I don't see him going top 3 like he usually does as a fantasy midfielder. He's going to drop off a little bit from that. Currently, he's going at 107 in fantasy, which is the lowest for him in quite some time. I project him for the rest of the season to go at 111, which puts him in 9th place. His time on ground is 81%, which is pretty normal for a midfielder. That's down 2% on last year, but that's not significant. His CBAs at 66% are down 11%, and I think that is to do with the emergence of Bailey Smith. He's gone in there and chewed up about 50% of the CBAs, and the Western Bulldogs, they spread it around anyway, so it's always a bit difficult to get a read on them. Mcrae has definitely suffered from this. Looking at his run home, he's got 4 easy matchups and 6 hard ones. So there's not a lot of joy that we can take from that. But if we do look at his data, he's down 2 disposals per game, and that is 2 kicks per game. So he's definitely not getting as much of the ball. And he's also down 1 tackle, and that's probably the CBAs again, like we said with Merritt. He's just down that 10-11%, and that's really costing him with the tackle numbers because he's not in there as much. So for the rest of the season, I do see him going at 111. I can't see him staying at the 107. He's a little bit better than that, but not significantly. He's just going to get that number up. Now that Bailey Smith is out, that's going to help him a lot. So next up, coming in at number 8, we have Josh Kelly with a projected average of 113. Now, Josh Kelly is a little bit more difficult to get a read on because he doesn't have those traditional midfield high CBAs, high time on ground. He has a little, it's not low time on ground, it's sitting at 80%, so that's fine, but down 3% on his 2021 numbers. Now, the CBAs are the harder one to get a read on. Under Leon Cameron earlier in the year, his CBAs were all over the place as they were sort of messing around with that midfield group. Last year, he spent half of the first part of the season in the forward line and had really low CBAs, so in 2021, his total percentage was 49%, which is quite low for a top midfielder, and he was still able to average 104, but he did come home in the back half of the year averaging 111. This year, he's going at 56%, but that's all over the place as well. Since Mark Mcrae's come in, the CBAs have gone up, but it is still a bit of a week-to-week debate or a look at what he's going to actually get CBA-wise. Now, if we look at his raw stats, in 2021, he averaged 26 disposals, and that was partly as that first half of the year he was in the forward line and getting low numbers. He averaged 4 marks and 6 tackles, whereas this year he has played more of a midfield role, but still not getting quite high enough CBAs for our liking. He's averaged 29 disposals, 4 marks, and 5 tackles. I believe with the higher CBAs under Mark Mcrae coming home, and Josh Kelly's sort of great game in the fantasy realm. So his game, the way he plays inside and outside is perfect for fantasy. So I think he can come home really strongly and get even over that 111 that we saw at the back end of last year. Coming in at number 7, we've got Jack Steele from St Kilda with a projected average of 115. Now, I've got the asterisk next to that projection there because I think he will average higher than some of the ones higher up on the list, but he's not available for selection yet, so you're not going to get all of those points out of him. But he will be a great one to pick up as the season continues. So, again, Jack Steele, similar to Christian Petracca, he's got those high CBAs and high time on ground combination that's always going to get you up there. You can fall back on that, regardless of if you're having a bad season or whatnot. So this year, he's definitely down on his 2021 numbers. He only averaged 107. That does include, of course, the injured game where he spent some time forward and down in the rooms. Now, if we look at his comparison of disposals, averaged 29 in 2021 and 28 in 2022, so that's quite similar. But if we look at the marks and the tackles, that's where he's really fallen away. Now, I do think that this is partly down to game style. I think the majority of players are taking less marks around the ground. More and more teams are going away from that sort of chip-to-chip marking style and more of a sort of run-and-gun style off half-back, and I think that is hurting some of these premium midfielders, and that's why we're seeing a steady drop in the numbers. But I think what he can get up, Jack Steele, he can get that tackle number back up. So in the back part of the year, as the winter kicks in, the tackle numbers start to increase. I think he's going to look more like that 8 tackles a game. I don't think he's quite going to average the 122 that he has in the past because he's not going to be able to get those marks up. But when he comes back, he's going to be a must-have in our teams. Next up on the list, we have Lachie Neale, and he is probably the midfielder that has surprised me the most this season. So, the first 5 rounds of the season, I did not have him in my team. I went with Josh Kelly over him. That was a huge mistake. And I had to watch in total envy as other teams had him picking up 120s, 140s all over the place. Now, what Lachie Neale does so well is he wins the ball in close on the inside. But this year, what I didn't think that he could do is that he's been able to spread and get those marks on the outside as well. Looking at the numbers from last year, he averaged 4 marks. This year, he's again averaged 4 marks, but he's gone up in the tackles and he's also put 5 disposals on from last year. So he's just a gun. He's winning it in close. He's getting it on the outside. And he's also kicking goals, which we don't have listed here. But looking at his run home, it is a little bit difficult. He's got 3 easy and 6 difficult games. But I don't think, again, it matters with Lachie Neale. He wins the ball himself. The only problem that Lachie Neale is going to run into is the tag, which hasn't been deployed that often this year. So I think he's going to be fine. He's another one that has huge time on ground numbers, 89% and 85 CBAs. So he does it every week. You don't have to worry about that. The season splits aren't too important with Lachie Neale, as last year he was injured. I just think he's going to keep doing what he's been doing. I think he averages 115 in the first half of the year, and he's going to go on to average that pretty much again. I've got him at 114 for the back half of the year. Coming in at number 5, we've got a pretty similar player in terms of game style. It's Clayton Oliver. I've got him going at an average of 115, so just above Lachie Neale. So far in the season, he's gone at 112, but he seems to really be building into the season. And like I said with the tackle numbers, I think as we get further into winter, more of those tackles are going to be able to be had basically as the weather gets wet. And he's going to improve that number. If you look at his 2021 stats, he averaged 31 disposals, 5 marks, 5 tackles. You look at 2022, he's actually down on the marks and the tackles. So people have applauded his outside game this year with the marks, but he's actually down on that number. Where he's really improved the scoring is in the disposals. So, and not just the disposals, but the kick to handball ratio. He has been a little handball happy in the past, but he seems to be working on that and fixing it out of his game. I think he can slightly improve on his first half of the season, which was 112, and take that up to 115. If we look at his season splits from last year, 113 in the first half and 104 in the second. So he did drop off in the second part of the year, but I think he'll be able to flip that around the other way. I think he had some quieter games at the start of the season this year, and he's going to build into the season even more. He also shares that same thing with Lachie Neale, where he has high time on ground and high CBAs. Like I said with Petracca, they have that midfield group that doesn't really change, so you don't have to worry about that, and you have guaranteed points. Coming in at number 4, it's Callum Mills. A little bit surprised that he's this low on my list, but I'm going to tell you why in a second. So his projected average for the rest of the year is 116, which is a 2-point rise on what he's currently going at. Last year he averaged 110. Now, the reason I get a little bit concerned with Callum Mills is just his role in the team. He does get flicked around a little bit. Sometimes he's playing that pure midfield role and he does 70-odd% CBAs. Other times he's on a wing. He's down at the sort of 40% mark. He averages this year 64% CBAs, which is okay, but it's getting a little bit on the low side. Now, where his stats are a little bit worrying are in the disposals. So he only averages 26 disposals per game. Now that is quite low for the premium midfielders, and you would like that number to be closer to 30. Where he is absolutely elite and unmatched by any other player are his marks and his tackles. Sydney always look for him for those little chip kicks on the D50 and also coming in to get the inside 50 as well. So he averages 7 marks per game, that is elite, and he averages 6 tackles per game, which is elite. And it's crazy with the fact that he only has 64% CBAs, because that is where most players get their tackles. So he's going at 114 with that CBA number, and why they seem to be favouring at Sydney guys like Chad Warner, Luke Parker, and even Heaney's coming in a little bit as well. I don't think that number is going to increase. I think it's going to stay around 60%, which means I think his average, unless he can get those disposals up, it's going to stay about the same, and a few players will overtake him. So he's coming in at number 4. I absolutely love him. He's in my team, Callum Mills. So next up, coming in at number 3, we have Touk Miller, the absolute fantasy jet. Now, Touk Miller's had a bit of a weird season. Last year, he averaged 122 points per game, and this year that has dropped to 107.5 points over the first 13 rounds of the season. That's a very significant drop. Now, one of the biggest things I put this down to is the Gold Coast game style. So in previous seasons, they've played that really chip-to-chip sort of a game style where they've kept the ball and really tried to hold possession so the other team can't hurt them and build up the play like that. This season, they've really changed it to that more Richmond-style game plan, that run and gun, less possession and less sort of acceptable for fantasy, really. So He still has those high numbers, like the high CBAs and high time on ground. But if we look at his disposal numbers, they are significantly down. He has got a slightly better kick to handball ratio, but he's gone from 32 disposals in 2021 down to 28 disposals. Now, I think it's partly to do with the Gold Coast game plan. It's also partly to do with the emergence of Mcrae coming back into the side, and also Noah Anderson, who's picking up a lot of ball as well. So there's less reliance on Touk Miller. What I think is that over this first part of the season, it's taken him a little while to get up to speed with that game style. And I do think that as the season continues, he's going to get, as we've seen in the last few rounds too, he's going to get better. He's more used to it now. They've had the bye, and he will really excel in the second half of the season. I have him going at 115, and we know in the second half of 2021, he went at 126. I think that's not going to happen. It's going to come back a little bit, but he'll still average 115, ranking him as the third best option to pick up. On to number 2 now, and we have one of my favourites. It's Rory Laird. He is an absolute fantasy gun. Now, I have him going at 118 for the rest of the season. Why is that? Rory Laird doesn't have that high time on ground. He's actually one of the lower time on ground guys in this list. Only 77%, and even last year he only went at 77 this year, and last year 78. So it's about what he does. He's done that all the time throughout his career. His CBA is at 76%. That's really good. Nothing wrong with that. And in 2021 it was 80%. So he's around that same number. Now, looking at his numbers, the only concerning thing is his disposals are fine. He averages 30 last year and 32 last year and 32 this year, which is excellent. The problem is a little bit that kick to handball ratio. So if we look at last year, it was 14 and 18, and now it's gone down to 12 and 20. So I think that's actually an area in the second half of the season that it'll probably come back a little bit, which will give him those more kicks, which will give him a higher fantasy score. Now, looking at the marks and tackles, he's going at 3 marks and 7 tackles. So 7 tackles is on the upper echelon. No other midfielder does that. So he's the highest in the tackle numbers of all midfielders in the list, and all of the ones that we studied. So what I think is, in the next half of the season, he has a really good run home. He's got 7 easy matchups. I think he plays West Coast again and North Melbourne twice. He's going to get those marks up. North Melbourne give away tons of uncontested marks. Rory Laird's going to really benefit from that. So I think that mark number is going to come up. And I think that he can keep the tackles. Like I said, the tackle numbers tend to go up. I don't think they'll go up from 7. That's really good anyway. But I think he'll be able to hold that around 6 or 7. And he's going to be able to improve his fantasy average to 118 points. We saw that he was able to do that in the back half of 2021. And that's what he's going to come home with. And number 1 on the list, my favourite player of all time. I have him in my team. I think he's an absolute fantasy weapon. I still think he's underrated, even though he is quite highly rated. It's Andrew Brayshaw with a projected average of 120. He's already going at 118. Do I think he can improve on that much? Not really. I just think he'll keep doing what he's been doing. We saw with his season splits last year, he averaged 9 points better in the second half of the season, so I think he can up that a little bit. Let's have a look at what he does. So his time on ground, 79%, which is fine. Not as high as some of the others, but I think even in some of the games in the last quarter, I've taken him off, and he spent longer periods off the ground just to save him a little bit as well. So I think that number in important games in the second half of the season, it will continue to grow. His CBA is at 77, is really good, so there's no issues there. In the run home, he has 3 easy matchups and 6 more difficult, so that may cause him a few little problems. But let's look at his disposals. So up from last year from 28 disposals per game to 31, and he's got a great kick to handball ratio, 17 kicks to 14 handballs. That is excellent, so he more often than not kicks. His marks are at 5.5, which is elite. That's really high. And his tackles are at 6. So even though he's got that outside run to get the 5.5 marks, he's still putting in 6 tackles per game. This guy is perfect. So he's going to keep at least going at that 118. I think he's going to hit more in the 120s, in the low 120s. Fremantle's game this year is really nice for fantasy as well. So I don't see any problems there. And he is your midfield number 1 pickup for the rest of the season. So there you have it. There it is, my top 10 AFL Fantasy midfield projections for the rest of the season. If you like the video, give it a like down below and subscribe to the channel. Also, if maybe you agree, maybe you disagree with my projections, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you next time.